When I moved to Paris a few years back, one of the first things that I noticed is that the French are absolutely obsessed with manga and anime. The biggest Japanese pop culture convention in Europe takes place right here in Paris, and even when you're out and about in the city on a normal day, you can't go more than 5 minutes without seeing something manga or anime related. The manga sections in the bookstores are huge, and it seems like there's a new clothing collab every single week. The likes of Dragon Ball and Naruto are of course very popular, but there's one title that reigns supreme: One Piece. Luffy is absolutely everywhere over here. Entire metro stations have been decorated with insane One Piece murals, and when the film One Piece Red premiered in Paris in 2022, there were literally lines around the block. If you need proof of just how popular One Piece is in France, just take a look at the insane banner that PSG fans held up during their home game against Bayern Munich in the Champions League last year. It featured Luffy delivering his Gum Gum Gatling gun attack, with one of his fists stretching the entire length of the stadium to smash a Bayern Munich badge to pieces. Believe it or not, it was this moment that convinced director Emma Sullivan from Netflix's live-action One Piece series that the property had global appeal.
When I saw Paris Saint-Germain fans roll down banners of Luffy punching Bayern Munich in a football pitch, you just think, football fans like One Piece. It's huge.
In this video, I'm going to take a deep dive into France's love for One Piece and explore exactly why manga and anime are so popular here. It all began in the late 1970s when an anime adaptation of Go Nagai's mecha series UFO Robot Grendizer made it to France. Released under the name Goldorak, the show follows the only surviving member of a royal family whose planet was decimated by an intergalactic tyrant named King Vega. He flees and finds refuge on Earth, though he's forced to face his past when Vega's forces threaten his new home. The show became an overnight hit, with the eponymous robot making the cover of Paris Match, basically the French version of Life magazine. The French dub got a new theme song, which quickly went platinum, turning singer Noam Caniel into a massive celebrity. Realizing that there was money to be made, a producer named Jean Jalopin, the creator of the hit cartoon Inspector Gadget, decided to get in on the action. Despite not speaking the language, Jalopin set up a company in Japan so he could co-produce his own series with Japanese animation studios. This led to the creation of two new shows in the 1980s, Ulysses 31, which was essentially a sci-fi take on Homer's Odyssey, and The Mysterious Cities of Gold, a new world-set adventure show animated by Studio Pierrot, who would of course go on to make Naruto. According to Jalopin, the Japanese style of animation was like a breath of fresh air to French kids, who at this point were used to the more static fare created in the West. He said, "If you look at what Hanna-Barbera or Filmation were doing at the time, the camera was always fixed, and the character moves in front of it. Because in American animation, the camera was still, they did 12 frames per second. For budget reasons, the Japanese generally did 6 or 8, but to compensate, they did realistic type camera moves. Funny angle, they called it in Japanese." The success of Ulysses 31 and The Mysterious Cities of Gold led to a scramble among French producers, particularly those in charge of children's variety shows. These shows aired in the mornings and afternoons, often running for several hours, so the creators usually filled some time with dedicated cartoon segments. By far the most popular among these shows was Club Dorothée, which ran for a decade between 1987 and 1997 and was responsible for bringing anime to the masses. This is where a generation of French kids got their first taste of anime, with French dubs of shows like Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, Captain Tsubasa, Saint Seiya, Fist of the North Star and City Hunter getting beamed into living rooms up and down the country, often with new titles and intros. For example, City Hunter was renamed Nicky Larson and came with a whole new theme song that will live in your head rent-free. What's interesting is that City Hunter and Fist of the North Star in particular are very much adult-oriented shows, yet they were being broadcast for children on daytime TV. Yes, the storylines and dialogue were often altered by the people who were writing the dubs, and the most gory parts were usually cut out, but this was still a far cry from the kind of stuff that's broadcast for kids nowadays. So how was this allowed to happen? Well, when Club Dorothée first aired in 1987, the general attitude in France and in most of the Western world was that cartoons were for kids, and anime was no exception. The notion of an animated show created for grown-ups simply didn't compute, and that's why stuff like this ended up on kids' TV.
Tiens bon!
Facile à dire.
It didn't take long for parents to start complaining, and politicians were quick to jump on the bandwagon, claiming that these morally bankrupt shows from abroad were going to corrupt the French youth. According to the manga scholar Nicolas Chauvet, presidential candidate Ségolène Royal was particularly vocal about the supposed dangers of anime. He said, "She politicized it to stop French kids going crazy because of Japanese cartoons. So then there was this deprogramming. Anime disappeared almost completely from Club Dorothée and was replaced by disgusting French sitcoms with ridiculous teenagers having their first kiss. Of course, by this stage, it was too late. French kids had experienced anime firsthand and they loved it. Telling them that it was too violent and that they weren't allowed to watch it anymore only made them more determined. As Chauvet said, the kids had become hooked on this drug. It was pure serotonin. The kids needed their shot of Dragon Ball. One way that French kids were able to get their fix was in print form. The first manga to be published in France was Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira, which came out in 1990. Dragon Ball followed a few years later, and this essentially opened the floodgates, much to the annoyance of the people who got really riled up about anime on French TV. However, they weren't alone this time. There's a proud tradition of comic books in France and neighbouring Belgium where they're referred to as either bande dessinée, literally drawn strips, or Franco-Belge. You've probably heard of the likes of Asterix and Tintin, which are considered to be real classics over here, and they really are fantastic, but they're very different from the manga that suddenly threatened to flood the market. At the time, BD creators were already struggling to be recognised along novelists and other artists for their work, and many were pretty vocal about manga's rise in popularity, fearing that it would be lumped in with what they did and cement their position in the hierarchy. To them, it was hyper-violent and seedy, and not something they wanted to be associated with. Some joined conservative parents and politicians in their crusade against manga, but stopping its publication proved to be a lot harder than getting kid shows to stop airing anime. Perhaps because it had basically been forced to dump its highly popular anime segments, Club Dorothée actually made a point of promoting the Dragon Ball manga when it was released in French in 1993. Before long, respected publications like Libération began showing support for the medium, helping edge manga a little closer toward mainstream acceptance. In 1996, the producers of Club Dorothée decided to set up a cable TV channel dedicated to showing the anime that had previously been aired on the variety show, giving deprived fans a much-needed outlet. This was obviously a pivotal moment, but the big turning point for anime and manga in France came in the year 2000. Two huge things happened in this year. One, Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke was released in France and became a huge success, lifting anime to all new levels of prestige. And two, the bande dessinée publisher Glénat began translating One Piece. These were the same guys behind the French version of Dragon Ball, and they also brought Bleach to France. But little did they know how much of a mega hit they now had on their hands. The rise of One Piece in France has been nothing short of phenomenal, though it wasn't exactly smooth sailing to begin with. When it was first published here, the translation was done by a guy named Sylvain Cholet, who decided to make some changes that he felt would make One Piece more appealing to a French-speaking audience. Usopp and Sanji were renamed Pipo and Sandy, for example, and lots of terms that just didn't roll off the French tongue were swapped out. Now, this isn't a problem unique to Cholet. This kind of thing happens all the time with translations in France. It happened with Grandizer back in the 70s, and it still happens to this day. But the issue here was that when the One Piece anime arrived in France, they stuck with the original Japanese names, and this led to all kinds of confusion. Glénat decided to go back to the beginning to produce a more faithful manga adaptation, and it became a bit of a mess, with Cholet wanting more royalties from the publishers and the two parties going to court. In the end, a new translator was hired who kept things as authentic as possible, and over the next decade, One Piece steadily leapfrogged all the competition until it became the #1 best-selling manga in France by some distance. It's held onto that top spot since 2011, selling well over 30 million volumes. The popularity of Oda's long-running series has skyrocketed in recent years, with 5.6 million copies sold in 2021 alone. According to Pierre-William Frégonès, an associate professor of international relations at Kobe University, this boom began as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. He said, "The health situation, combined with curfews, lockdowns, perhaps the frustration of having to stay in France instead of travelling to Japan, fostered this fascination. As a matter of fact, the French government launched the Culture Pass in 2021, which first allowed 18-year-olds, then later teens aged 15 to 17, to spend up to €300 on arts, theatre, music, and books. Manga was the first beneficiary of this policy. The French media quickly dubbed this the Manga Pass because 70% of the funds allocated to these teens were reportedly being spent on manga, and One Piece was one of the major winners. Of the top 10 individual manga volumes sold in France in 2023, 6 of them were One Piece. One Piece has gotten so big that even Emmanuel Macron is a fan. The French president has been known to sneak copies of the manga into his tweets, and Oda himself actually sent an original illustration to Macron with a note in French dedicating it to him and all of the One Piece fans in France. Of course, there are those who think that Macron is just feigning interest to make himself appear like he's down with the kids, and there is probably an element of truth to that. But even so, the fact that the president of France is using One Piece as a way to bridge the gap with younger generations speaks volumes about how much sway the series has in this country. Macron isn't the only person to realise this either. One Piece has been known to appear in elementary school textbooks in France, with this particular screenshot from episode 20 of the anime used as a way to show kids how to treat scurvy. There's also been collabs with everything from the Paris Aquarium to the Monnaie de Paris, where France's coins are minted. But what is it about One Piece that makes it so popular in France? Well, the French love all the stuff about the series that everyone else enjoys, from the unique and colourful characters to the unrivaled sense of adventure in Oda's world. But I think what really makes it click with readers in France is that Luffy encapsulates two core parts of the French cultural identity: a love of good food and sticking it to the man. As the renowned French chef and culinary writer Georges-Auguste Escoffier once said, "La bonne cuisine est la base du véritable bonheur," meaning good food is the foundation of genuine happiness. This sounds like something Luffy would actually say. France is a nation of meat lovers, and there's nothing the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates loves more than some good meat on the bone. Plus, there's the fact that Oda once revealed in an interview that if the Straw Hats came from real-world countries, then the crew's cook Sanji would actually be French. There's a culinary vein running through One Piece that just adds to the appeal for French fans. But what really helps them connect to the story isn't Luffy's appetite, it's his attitude. While he's a happy-go-lucky character in many ways, at his core, Luffy is about three things: freedom, equality, and brotherhood. This is quite literally the national motto of France, with its origins being traced back to the revolution. If you saw Gojira's epic performance during the opening ceremony of the Paris 2024 Olympics, then you'll know that the revolution is still very much part of the fabric of French society. They are thoroughly unapologetic about the way they brought down the free-spending royal regime, chopping the king's head off to establish the French Republic. These ideals are at the very heart of One Piece, in which the people in power are opposed by the revolutionary army, whose sole aim is to dismantle the corrupt world government. Luffy may consider himself to be a pirate rather than a revolutionary, but that's because he lives by his own moral code. He values liberty and friendship above all else, and if ever an anime character embodied the philosophies upon which modern France is built, it's him. Now, you may be thinking, hang on, doesn't Luffy want to make himself a ruler among pirates? Well, no, he actually doesn't. As he said himself, his goal in life is not to rule, it's to be the freest person sailing the seas. In his opinion, that's what really makes you a king. Also, I think it's important to point out that it's not just kids who love One Piece in France. The people who grew up watching Club Dorothée in the 80s and 90s are still manga and anime fans to this day, and it's this cross-generational appeal that turned France into the #1 consumer of manga outside of Japan. Many of these people were inspired to go into the industry themselves as adults, and this shows in the style of animation that's become the norm in France over the past decade or so. Shows like Totally Spies, Wakfu, and Miraculous Ladybug are products of the Club Dorothée generation, who helped normalize what used to be a niche interest. During an interview with the Art Book Club, French cartoonist and comic book creator Patricia Lai Huang revealed that she and her friends used to be considered the weird ones in class because they would sit at the back and draw their own manga. She went on to work on Totally Spies, among other things, while one of her classmates ended up going to Japan for a job and even got the chance to meet Hayao Miyazaki in person. The Club Dorothée generation cleared the way for Luffy and co to take over France, and every French manga and anime fan owes them a huge debt of gratitude. Thanks for watching everyone, and let me know how popular One Piece is in your country in the comments. And for the French viewers who are old enough to remember the show, what was your favourite Club Dorothée anime growing up? Cheers guys, I'll see you in the next one.